From Washington, D.C., this is Middle East Focus.
Greetings to our listeners. My name is Lyne Sneige, and I'm the director of the Arts and Culture Center at the Middle East Institute. Today's podcast is one of the several programs coming out of our current exhibition, Between the Sky and the Earth, Contemporary Art from the UAE, that opened on December 3rd, 2021, and will be up through March 31st, 2022. The exhibition is curated by one of UAE's most sought-after curators, Munira Saigh, and is presented in partnership with NYU Abu Dhabi Art Gallery. Between the Sky and the Earth brings together 12 artists reflecting the diverse contemporary art ecosystem in the UAE today. Through themes such as environment, consumerism, and the impact of rapid urbanization in the UAE, the artists reflect on their social, cultural, and natural landscapes and challenge standard narratives about the Emirates. Some of the featured artists include Ibtisam Abdelaziz, Tariq Al-Hussein, Hashil Al-Lemki, Sheikh Al-Mazroua, Lamia Gargash, Muhammad Ahmed Ibrahim, Muhammad Qazim, and last but not least, my two guests today on the program, Afra Aldhaheri and Asma Belhamar, whom I will introduce in a minute. So for those of you who are in DC and who have not yet had the chance to see the show, it is a beautiful exhibit. You can make an appointment on our site, www.mei.edu, go to Arts and Culture Center. The exhibition is also available to view online, although nothing beats seeing it in person, honestly. First up on the program today is Afra Aldhaheri, and I can't wait to bring her in conversation with me to speak about her work, the themes that drive her vision and practice. We will also be speaking about the work she has in the exhibition. Afra Aldhaheri's work is rooted in her experiences growing up in Abu Dhabi and the wider UAE, a place of recent and rapid change. Working across various mediums, including mixed media, sculpture, drawing, painting, installation, photography, and printmaking, she explores notions of time and adaptation, rigor, and fragility. Her work is the result of extensive material-based experimentation, which she calls an immersive production process. Aldhaheri obtained her MFA from Rhode Island School of Design in 2017. She has exhibited in the UAE, Saudi, the US, and Europe. Welcome, Afra. It is such a pleasure to host you. Your pieces in the show are so reflective, have so many layers to them, and are about so much more than one sees at first glance. But before we get to speak about them, tell us more about your practice, what drives you as an artist, and what are the themes that you explore in your work?
Hi, thank you for having me. It's an absolute honor. I think that a lot of the ideas and topics that I explore in my work come from personal experiences and personal experiences through upbringing. I grew up in Abu Dhabi, and from my childhood until I was 14, I was also spending my summers in the States because my father used to study there. And in Abu Dhabi, I would spend the weekdays and weekends in Lyne. And so, really, my practice became a response to the development that's happening in the city, trying to process and unfold and unpack all the changes that we've been going through. And some of these resulted in myself trying to understand the pace that we're moving at and realizing how fast paced the city is growing. I was looking at the development of the cityscape through construction, and that became like a timeline to me. The rising buildings and all the construction became suggestive of this rapidly growing timeline. And so, in response to that, I started feeling the need to kind of slow down as a result, realizing that the way that this fast change had been affecting us, particularly through our memory and how we kind of register memory, and realizing that I have more vivid memories of my younger years than, per se, last week or last month, where memory had become very congested and experiences overlap, resulting in not being able to recall. And so I wanted to consciously slow down my practice in order to experience the moments for a longer time and allow them to register.
That's so interesting, Afra, that you say that, because that it's almost your own way of having a creative response to what was going on around you. And as I was reading about your practice and your work, you speak about your process in your studio, right? And you mentioned something that I would like you to speak about before we sort of narrow down on your pieces of artwork that we are showing in the exhibition and whatnot. But in one of your interviews, you describe your creative process and the importance of repetition in it. And you say to a point of almost obsession, as if this had become something almost cathartic for you, or a process of healing or reflection or response. Can you take us more into your process, into your actual work? Talk to us about, the ways in which you develop your pieces.
Yeah, so when I was in school in my younger developmental years, learning was very much memory based. So we'd memorize information to learn and heavily relied on memorizing information, whether it's history or religion. Even in literature, we would memorize poems. And so to memorize something, you would have to repeat it and keep reciting it or keep reading it again and again to actually memorize it. And so the practice took that form of kind of repeatedly creating the same form using a variation of materials in a way to experience it in different ways, repetitively, again and again. And it does become an obsession at some point because you're repeatedly, for example, trying to braid material, different material, and seeing how they would respond, how they would hold the form, or how it would actually respond to this action of weaving a material into a braid.
And I can totally see how that whole spirit is imbued not only into the finished work, but into the process, into the entire spirit of what you do. And you've touched upon that in the last part of your sentence. And you mentioned braiding and materials. Let's talk about the materials that you use a little bit, Afra. You say that your practice is an experimentation of using and marrying different materials. And in your last series, of which we have a few pieces in the show, you use cement and rope. And those are very different materials. Talk to us about that, about your encounter with rope and what it represented, and why did you marry it with cement, which is so rigid, right? Which is such a different material.
Yeah, I mean, the cement or resorting to the use of construction materials kind of started to happen when I moved to the States to pursue my MFA. One of the spring breaks, we took a trip, myself and Asma Belhamar, to San Francisco, and we arrived at night. So we check in into the hotel, get into the room. It was time for dinner. We had our dinner, went back to sleep. We opened the window. There wasn't much to see. It was just a bit dark, and we were like, okay, let's see in the morning what we're looking at. And it was our first trip to San Francisco. And I opened the curtains in the morning. Looking out, I saw a construction crane, and I got so excited. I'm like, oh my God, Esma, come check this out. And she's like, what? I'm like, look, a construction crane. And I really did not realize how excited I got. about that. And it got me really thinking. I'm like, why am I excited about construction crane? And like further kind of processing this moment, realizing that I was not homesick for home or family or anything at that point. I was too excited enjoying my art practice, but I missed construction. It made me feel nostalgic. It felt like home. I was telling Asma, doesn't this look like home? It's so interesting. So that moment became almost like an epiphany of realization that construction material had always been an important part or like an embedded part of my childhood. I grew up surrounded by it. I've always lived in homes where the surrounding area or environment would have construction and would have that type of material, the cement, the concrete, the cinder blocks, the steel, metal, and plaster, all sorts of things. I changed my destination where to buy art materials, and I started in the States going to Home Depot and sourcing materials from there. And I would shop for materials not knowing what their initial use or utility is, but I would buy them for what I see I can make from them or what I see that I can utilize them or how I can have them function in my own studio.
How interesting. How interesting that your choice of sort of material is so embedded in childhood memories, right? We associate so much of the things that we see, that we smell, that we hear, and where we grow up, right? And we never know what shape and space they are going to occupy. And in your case, they are a strong pillar of the work that you develop. Afra, your encounter with rope and what it represents, when did that start? When did your discovery of rope that you also develop into, stories about hair and all that symbolism in the Middle East and in Middle Eastern cultures? Talk to us a little bit about that.
So I was doing a residency in St. Ives, Cornwall, in the UK in 2019. And I kind of gave myself a set of rules, very simple. I wanted to focus on making works on paper and see what that would look like when I don't have all my construction materials or objects and the more sculptural objects and tools and materials. And I kind of confined myself to only working with paper and creating works on paper. And I developed the hair drawings in that residency where I would actually collect my own naturally fallen hair and apply it to paper, adhere it to paper, actually using a medium, and then just enjoying color mixing and painting the spaces that the hair creates. I did not want to manipulate the hair or even force it to exist in a certain way. I would just put it on the paper and move the brush around, allowing it to actually exist in whatever forms it wants to exist in. I was kind of intimidated to paint for the longest time. And every time I started painting, I would question why and what its significance and why is it important to paint such image or topic. But I really enjoyed color mixing and I had urges to paint. And I found myself kind of freed from all those ideas when I actually allowed the hair to exist as it wants. And my role there was just to meditate through mixing and applying the color. And so moving from that work to 2020, where I was working on my first solo show and also a commission for Beyond Emerging Artist Commissions for Abu Dhabi Art Fair, I wanted to really materialize these hair drawings physically in a physical form. So they were very tactile, they're very soft, and they have their own kind of existence in their fragility, how they exist on the paper. But I wanted to have the same quality translated into an object, and I couldn't work with hair at a scale or even use it as an object. And so I started looking for materials that would be suggestive of hair, materials that would function like hair, that would respond to my process and gestures and actions the same way hair responds to treatment. And in my investigation, I went to many hardware stores buying everything that is a spiral. I have curly hair, so I was looking for spiral material in a spiral form until I arrived to rope, which was very interesting to me because it's an organic material. It's natural, it's organic. And I started braiding it, trimming it, treating it like hair. And soon after, the rope started responding the same way hair would respond. Like I would braid it and then open the braids, and it would hold the wave. It would hold the indentations that is created because of the braid. And so I started realizing that hair has the capacity to hold form. So hair has the capacity to memorize form, which became very interesting to me as a segue to materiality and their meaning and projecting meaning through material. And for me, that was kind of the moment where I felt like I have the agency to actually present rope as hair to my audience without questioning it, because in treating it like hair, it's actually responding back like hair. Hence, I can actually present it as hair in the context of my work.
That is a fantastic story, Afra. And just for our listeners to imagine, some of your work with rope that symbolizes hair are those dramatic installations of, big installations that are braided or that fall like sort of curtains and hair almost to the floor, in high ceiling. And those are just lovely. Sadly, our gallery could not hold an installation of that scale, but we do have three beautiful pieces of your series that is worked with rope and one piece with cement. I'm going to mention the three pieces that we have in the exhibition, Afra, and I'm going to ask you to speak about one of them. So we have St. Eve's hair drawing, hair watercolor on paper from 2019. And we are presenting To Tame and Contain from 2021, a piece that is made with rope and cement, and School Braid, number 2 rope 2021. This is a big braid that is coiled at its center and core. It rests on a pedestal in the gallery. The rope is then long and braided and falls gently on the side of the pedestal, just like a real braid. I have to say, Afra, this is one of my favorites. So I'm going to ask you to speak about the series, but to tell us the story behind School Braid, as it hides so much more than one can see at first.
Absolutely. Well, school braid came from a memory that I had of my hair being braided in school. My mom would braid my hair. I had very long hair, almost reaching to my knees, and full hair, thick and curly. So my mom really had to endure a lot of labor in just maintaining my hair. And I remember asking her when I was younger, why can't I cut my hair? And she would respond by something like, oh, like your grandmother is going to get upset with us and stuff. So it was interesting to me to see how, like, the influence of these cultural ideologies affected me as a child. I had to endure that kind of pain. My mom had to endure the labor in order to sustain a certain image that is accepted by society. But then I think most importantly, that is actually presentable to family, which is a very important part of our role in the society, family. And it was very interesting to me. And going to school, I would have a very thick braid, and I would look around to my classmates and they would have finer braids. And I used to be shy of my braid because it was different. So I would hide it inside my uniform. And growing up and realizing how that was a significant moment that identified me as a person, I felt like that moment had to be celebrated. I had to change the narrative. I had to celebrate my mother's labor and celebrate my thick braid rather than be ashamed of it. So it's almost as if going back in time and reliving this moment and celebrating it.
How powerful and how fascinating, Afra. Can I ask you, so does this come across, does that message that you describe is really what tame and contain, the other piece with the rope and the cement intertwined together, is really about? Is this about the weight that hair or rope or all the cultural expectation that comes with it is about? Is that the tame and contain piece message, would you say?
Yeah, so during my research for my solo show that was called Split Ends and took place in MEI Art Gallery in Dubai in January of 2021, I was actually prior to that working with Munira Saig as well. I would go to her and kind of run my ideas through her and have her pick my brain. And I would invite her to the studio and look at the new work and give me feedback. And I remember we had a conversation where she was asking me, like, what does it mean for you to braid your hair? And what does that gesture mean? And I soon realized that I braid my hair basically to tame it in order to hide it under my veil. And so, having big hair, it was a challenge. Everyone would ask me, of my friends, like, how do you hide that hair under your veil? And I'm like, well, I braid it. So, it's a form of taming, it's a form of taming the hair to actually exist. But also, similar to that, we both recalled in our childhood that our hair was tamed to be presentable in school. So it would be like pulled into like different kinds of braids and creamed down and gelled down at times to actually have it be presentable. And so in the work to tame, it becomes a form of actually taming, but also hiding the rope that was braided. And no, actually, in that work, it was fabric that was braided. So it was actually almost as if veiling the fabric using cement to contain it.
Thank you so much, Afra. This is so fascinating. It's such a good segue to the work of Asma Belhamar, who is my next guest on the program. Welcome, Asma. There are so many connections between your work and that of Afra. But before we get into this, I will introduce you quickly. Asma Belhamar's work explores the phenomenon of the megastructure in the UAE and its confrontation with the visual memory of the land. Her highly technical craft transforms these megastructures into visual poetry and questions how they have impacted our perception of reality in the Emirates. Her practice is driven by experimentations with fabric and paper, printing, and projection techniques. She completed an MFA degree in textile design from Rhode Island School of Design in 2017. Belhamar is currently an assistant professor at Zayed University in the College of Arts and Creative Enterprises. She has exhibited in New York and the UAE. Asma, welcome. A lot of what Afra has shared, especially with regards to her reaction and her creative response to the rapid urbanization of her city, must have resonated with you. But why don't you introduce us to your work and your larger practice and the kinds of themes that you explore in your art?
First of all, thank you for having me. I'm so grateful to do this podcast discussion. So, regarding the themes that I'm considering to speak about in my work, it's basically the confrontation of the visual memory and the local landscape. And I try to bring those hybrid materialities into the work. And my practice would definitely engage the narrative of bringing the perspective and architecture to face those visuals. You just mentioned the larger work. Maybe you meant larger vision.
Absolutely, absolutely. Talk to us about, you just said how you reflect on, this rapid urbanization, almost the dizzying development that went around you as you were seeing your country and your city sort of getting built up. What did that trigger in your practice? What are the things that you wanted to explore?
I definitely wanted to bring those memories and make them tangible somehow, or let's say pausing them or holding them and try to bring them back to confront our vision now. The thing is, in the UAE, where the development happened really fast, and I remember when I was like 9 or 6 years old, moving around the cities. I live in Dubai. I'm from Ras Al Khaimah, which is another town that is 45 minutes away from Dubai. But then also I have other relatives who lives in Abu Dhabi, and it's almost 2 hours between Dubai and Abu Dhabi. So you can imagine my childhood. Every other weekend we visit the relatives because it's a part of our, rituals and culture to visit relatives. And I witness all of those visuals, the constructions, the mountains, the sand dunes, and all of that. But then I noticed something that me and my siblings, and also many people who actually lived in the UAE or the United Arab Emirates during the 80s and 90s, witnessed a lot of change. And let's say for a moment, you cannot really realize how fast it was. And when you see images of like Dubai before and after, it's very popular, you can just Google that and see there is a very popular highway, the main highway in Dubai. It's called Sheikh Zayed Road. And you can see that there were like just two buildings, the Trade Center and then other very, like, let's say 24 level building. But then now you can see it, full of skyscrapers and more than 100 for sure. And I just felt that there are many things that I can discuss and bring through my work, I mean.
Absolutely. It must be daunting. And it's astonishing how many young artists in the UAE are reflecting on that, right? It must have been, as I said, a daunting experience to just witness that rapid, almost like somebody rolling a carpet, right, the next day. And you have to re explore your own city and, new roads being sort of built as you are growing up. But in your work as well, you describe your process, and I want to use some of the words that I've read you characterized your studio in, your work in the studio. You describe your process as detailed, slow, calm, and opposite to the outside pace of the city. Was this something intentional that you wanted in your process, as if your own sort of reaction to what was going on in your city, as if to cling on the memory so that you can remember it? Or was it something that developed naturally and then you reflect on it? Talk to us a little bit about your process and what happens in your studio as you develop the works that I will ask you in a bit to describe a little bit more to us.
Sure. So I feel that those moments, and I specifically describe those moments through a moving vehicle. It's part of the culture as well. I mean, it's not very common to walk around the city. You pass by things through, the moving vehicle, so by car. So it's very interesting to witness all of that through the movement or motion. And that's why I felt that I need to slow down those visions or slow down those fragments of the memory by posing them in the, let's say, the drawings or the paintings. I do think that those moments are ephemeral because when you see them from the car, it's just very fast and you can see motion, not just something that is precarious, it's precarious. And it also, at the same time, it's indelible. So I felt that combining those elements together in drawings or paintings that hold those two juxtaposition in a slow pace. And the slow pace I translated in my work as patterns because I studied textile and pattern designing, and I do reflect and respond to the building facades and the windows and the balconies. So I definitely draw them and try to treat them as repeat or a pattern that I can repeat. And I also focus on trying to respond or mimic the perspective that I see from the car window. So it's not just kind of a front facade. And then that's one thing. So I do take time in translating that and taking my time doing this process, and it takes time. But I do think that this is how I reflect. So you can actually see the time by looking at the drawings and looking how maybe the effort was made to do those detailed drawings. And it's most of the drawings or the paintings are architectural figures or fragments versus something that is organic because it responds to the motion of both.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about those pieces, of which we have some pieces in the show that we're showing are facade observation 1, 2, and 3. And true, they are fabric illustration on paper and print from 2019. And true, they are very detailed and they're very architectural, as you say, almost geological drawings, like those elevation drawings where you see the layers all the way to the center of the earth. So what are this is a very different reading of a facade of the building, right? What does it represent? What do you want audiences to leave with after sort of feeling your work and understanding the layers that you draw and make in such detail?
Yes, I would like to familiarize those building facades to the audience. I think some of us think that we're alienating them because they're new to the environment. But I realize that there are few actually fun stories to tell about the UAE locals who were unintentionally building this relation with architecture and the fast pace of construction. So one of them is, for example, me and my siblings, we were, sitting in the car going to Ras Al Khaimah or Abu Dhabi from Dubai. We play this game called the shadow counts, which was basically trying to look at building facades and try to recognize any familiar shape, let's say a duck or a car or anything like when you see the sky. But we also try to realize this shape by also looking at not just the windows, the shadow count. So we can definitely try to figure any kind of silhouette of those shapes. And it's a game that we just came up with by looking at those buildings, and we try to really make it quick because we are in the car. Other example is some of my cousins or second cousins were naming their newborn. His name is Umar, but they gave him a nickname because Umar Metro, which was at the same date as the launch of the metro in Dubai. So they're associating the nickname with a project in Dubai.
Yeah, the city impacting every single aspect of life, right? The city and its architecture and its transportation and how people navigate the city. So tell me, Asma, just to give us an idea about your larger practice, is all your work grounded in this way in architecture?
I do think that every time I try to investigate an idea, I see what medium will serve me best. So it's not just painting or drawing. I do also projection mapping, installations, and also sculpture. So it depends on the ideas, but all of it go under the big umbrella of this transfiguration of those two hybridities or two materialities. of architecture versus landscape. So you will find some elements appears in this way, but also you can see distortion, and this is where I really try to bring in all of my projects.
Asma, it's been wonderful to speak with you today, but our time has run out and we will have to leave things here. Thank you both for joining me on the program today and for sharing your thoughts and inspiration. Congratulations on your work and best of luck in your future projects.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me. It was a great pleasure to talk to you.
For our listeners, please check our exhibition and the work of our two guests today on our site, www.mei.edu, Arts and Culture Center, and follow us on social media, Twitter at MEI Arts Culture.
This has been a presentation of the Middle East Institute. To support MEI's programs and podcasts, please donate at www.mei.edu. Thank you for your support.